Hello and welcome to Face Off. The Rugby World Cup is kicking off here in France, and for the next 7 weeks, millions of fans across the world will have their eyes firmly fixed on the progress of an oval ball up and down the pitch. Rugby fans are already hailing the event as a celebration. They say their sport is the real, a beautiful game with more passion, more guts and more nobility than football. But critics contend the game has gotten too violent and too testosterone-packed, with broken bones and other injuries becoming commonplace. Which leads us to today's debate. Rugby, is it a game of gentlemen or of brutes? Joining us to face off on this issue is Australian journalist Bryce Corbett on my left, and Peter Berlin, who is the sports editor at the International Herald Tribune, on my right. Peter, let's start with you. Broken necks have become too commonplace in rugby, haven't they? Is rugby becoming too rough?
I'm not sure that they've become more common. It's always been a risk of rugby, the broken neck, and it tends to happen more to players lower down, because especially young players who haven't developed the astonishing neck muscles that the top players have, the front row forwards in particular.
But it still happens at an elite level. I remember in 1995 in the World Cup.
Max Brito of Ivory Coast, who was not a top professional, broke his neck tackling a Tongan. And in the last World Cup, Ben Darwin, who was a front row forward for Australia, was carried off in the semi-final with his neck in a brace against New Zealand. The problem for the Australians there was they were, throughout the World Cup, overpowered in the front row. Yet they kept winning, but it is a game which emphasises physical strength, physical domination, and in which the stronger need to grind down or knock out the weaker opponents.
Yeah, ultimate example of survival of the fittest.
Yes, and it's no surprise, for example, that so many games are close until the last 20 minutes. You just pound your opposition into exhaustion. As
a passive rugby fan, I'm struck, though, however, by some of the nicknames that we hear going around on the pitch. I mean, Samoa's Brian Lima is known as the chiropractor. South Africa has the incredible Skulk, and the coach of Fiji, as a player, he was known as a human skewer. It doesn't sound very peaceful, does it, Bryce?
No, it doesn't. But I mean, I think that this is also because you're starting to see this is a sport now, which all of a sudden, since it went professional 10 years ago, there's a lot of money involved in the creation of a lot of hype. It's become a spectator sport. It's become an amazing spectacle. And as a result, you probably find that it is morphing more into this entertainment. If you think about it, it's one of the great gladiatorial kind of clashes that we have. There's going to be a stadium full of people at Stade de France tonight who will all be there baying for blood. And it does have a kind of, and a bit of attendant drama that goes with it. I think that certainly it's an extremely violent game, but ever since it went professional, it
went professional in the mid-90s.
Then you've seen just people whose job it is to build themselves up as enormously as they possibly can.
What do you say? Has professionalisation made the game more violent?
They're getting bigger, they're getting stronger, they're getting faster. Also, the defences are getting better organised. It's much more difficult to run round or through a defence of a good team now. You have to make them tackle, and you have to take the contact. I think another change, though, is that we're talking about legal violence in rugby, tackling, hitting. And that's part of and there's a very macho culture around rugby, and more so in some countries. You mentioned South Africans and Samoans, who you were talking about. They're particularly teams that emphasise hitting hard or physical domination. But you also have the illegal violence and punching, stamping, and I think
are referees too lenient?
Well, I think one of the things is they've become stricter because everything is now visible on television. If you had if you had two front row forwards thumping each other in the past, you'd ignore it and let them get on with it. Now it's visible; everybody sees it. You have video, even, and the same goes for the tradition of stamping on people who are obstructing the ball at a ruck or a maul.
Bryce, many players are wearing body armours. these days. Is it really protecting the player, or is it actually making the game more brutal as players lose their inhibitions?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, I guess, somewhat of a catch-22, isn't it? They are starting to wear the body armour, but then at the same time, because they're protected, then they're hitting each other harder. It is this constant escalation as the game, as the stakes become higher, because with every World Cup that passes, it's a bigger deal. It's I think the audience grows. I think the interest in it grows from people, and so there is the stakes are greater, and so the hits are bigger. The players who are coming in are at least another £10 every time there's another World Cup. I guess, the use of this sort of body armour probably does encourage perhaps a little more recklessness.
We see a lot more protection.
Trying to go back to that, which is one of the things that American football. What they found out, the experience of American football is that helmets which were introduced to protect players make the game more dangerous. They become weapons.
Would you say that American football is more brutish than rugby?
Yes, certainly. Partly because it allows certain things that rugby doesn't allow. It allows you to effectively tackle people who haven't got the ball.
But
it
you
allows
do see
you
all
to
these
hit them with
padding
their
on American
helmet.
football players, though. Is that not helping them, or are you saying that makes them even more
Well, it's
brutal?
the helmet in particular which people use as a weapon. You're not supposed to spear tackle in American football, but they hit with the helmet.
But it
They hit
seems
with
to
the
me
shoulder, and you hit with the shoulder
It's
pad,
a
which is solid.
much less skill involved in American football, if I can say so.
Well, there is skill. That's the other thing, is that American football divides the game up at any particular moment on the field. Half the players on the offensive side aren't allowed to touch the ball, almost half, and the defensive players only play defence. You really can't have someone on a rugby field who can't catch the ball and can't pass the ball. You can't get away with it. So that division of labour in American football, they talk about the skill positions. By implication, the other positions are the non-skill positions, and those
Just
guys
the
are there
brute force,
to smash into each other.
Yeah.
Let's return to rugby, though, however. I mean, how long is the average career of a rugby player, and are we seeing those careers being shortened by all this violence that we see on the pitch?
I don't know that you're seeing them shorten. I think perhaps the fact that they are professional and it is these people's professions, they prepare themselves in such a way that, their livelihood is to be prepared for the playing of this sport. And being prepared means everything from, when they are injured, there is better preparation. Their bodies are much better prepared to deal with the injury.
There's better medical treatment as well.
The medical treatment is, amazing. You'll have 5 physios and 3 doctors, working to bring you back up to speed. So I think perhaps the career of a rugby player is probably as long as it ever had been.
And yet the number of injuries is very high. And if you look, even before the World Cup starts, several teams are without key players. And one of the decisive factors in the World Cup will be injuries, will be a squad's ability to absorb attrition, to absorb injuries. Another difference is that it used to be that you finished the game with the same 15 you started. That has gradually evolved, but now you can see 7 substitutions. People are taken off the moment they start bleeding or the moment they're limping. You can replace them, which is good for the team, but it's a preventative measure for the players. But you will see injuries in this World Cup. It's inevitable, and that is inherent to the sport. It's part of the attraction.
Do you have to be big to play rugby, though? We have a few smaller players, I should say, in this World Cup. So does it mean you need from France?
There are always positions, and this will never change in rugby, where agility and speed and being able to be nimble are going to be important.
I disagree. If you look at the best example of the French used to be a team built in the backs on running and passing and speed and agility, and they have one small back, Dominici, that's it. Everybody else is
brawn
huge,
is more important than experience.
A good big one will be a good bad one, a good little one, and they're looking for good big ones, and the French are clearly under Laporte. They'll pick a big guy over a little guy every time, and if you look at the French squad, it is almost to a man huge. And one of the old attractions of rugby was that you could be 5'6" and be a good rugby player.
Let's stay on this on this changing image of rugby in France. It's traditionally known as a grassroots sport from the southwest of France, and in England it's known as a upper class sport. Are these images of rugby, are they changing at the same time as we've seen this more brutish game?
Definitely. In Australia, 15 years ago, rugby was a game which was played by university teams, and it was a public school activity. When it went professional in '96 in Australia, you had a lot of people moving from rugby league, which is considered traditionally a more working class sport, into rugby union, and that was when you started to see this drift. That was when it became professional and it became money was being poured into it.
Speaking of money, I think we have some pictures here of a calendar ahead of the World Cup of the various rugby players. See if we can get some pictures there. I don't know if you can see it on your sides. I don't think so. But apparently the images of huge, brawny rugby players of a calendar for each month of the year. I mean, there is a lot more money now these days.
Well, and that also shows a difference in maybe social attitudes as a whole. The idea of an All Black like Dan Carter did, being photographed in just underwear and stuck on a huge building in Auckland as part of an advertising campaign. The idea of a rugby player as metrosexual in New Zealand 10 years ago would have been unthinkable. Unthinkable. So yes, and he's doing it for the money. And if you go around France or open the newspapers, there are French rugby players selling everything.
Is the sport losing a bit of its heart because of it? This money?
No, I don't know. I think it's too easy to say just because it's there's a lot of money being poured into it that the sport is losing credibility or losing heart. Not at all. I think it's good that there's this interest and that the appeal has been broadened. I think it can't hurt the sport at all.
Well, again, I disagree. If the tradition of rugby was an amateur game played in clubs which were locally rooted, and if you played an international 1 week for England or Wales or Scotland, you went back to your clubhouse the next week, played for your club, and then drunk with your local mates in the bar afterwards. That's gone. The top paid players, the club's professional. You don't have that sort of same clubhouse atmosphere. They don't drink in the same way. There's not the same. It used to be a social game. And at the elite level, it isn't anymore.
But does that make it any worse? Does that make the game any worse, though? That they don't go and get drunk?
It depends what the heart of rugby is.
Quick answers, gentlemen. This World Cup tournament, it's the first time the tournament is being held in a non-English speaking country. Some say this World Cup is going to be the best ever with a very high standard. Does that mean it'll be the most violent ever as well? Quick answers.
Oh look, yeah. I think as Peter said before, there are going to be some big hitting injuries. I think in this World Cup, but that's what people are paying to see.
There are going to be some frightening games. Tonight's game between France and Argentina promises to be a game of just relentless physical contact. The whole of Group A, England, South Africa's group, but there will be some flashes of brilliance, running something more artistic. I hope.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've run out of time, and that wraps up this edition of Face Off. We've been speaking to the Australian journalist Bryce Corbett and the sports editor from the International Herald Tribune, Peter Berlin. Stay with us here on France 24. Bye for now.